vote is about power, who gets it and who has to give it up. The Yes campaign wants to demolish the powers of this, the Italian Senate. The No campaign hates the reforms. Vote no, they say, to stop Renzi. In the last days of the campaign, opinion polls are banned, so we have no way of knowing which way this vote is heading. If Yes wins, Matteo Renzi will stay here at the Prime Minister's office. If No wins, he may quit.
Well, let's get some analysis. Let's speak to the Italian political analyst, Andrea Vannucci, who joins us from Rome via webcam, as we can see. Andrea, of course, no political opinion polls, probably not such a bad thing given the recent accuracy of opinion polls around the world. But in your opinion, which way do you see this going, sí or no?
Well, starting from early September, the opinion polls that were allowed to be released showed an increasing favor for no, and which is this is what has worried more Matteo Renzi and his group. At the beginning of the year, in spring, he was much more confident, and it was him that initially said that this was to be a test for the government. And most Italians today will vote basically in favor or against the government, rather than on the real contents of the reforms that are being offered.
Well, exactly. This has become a test for Matteo Renzi. In terms of what the referendum is really about, just explain to us what the Italians are voting for.
The Italians are voting with a single question that would technically allow or reject a bunch of reforms that are affecting the Senate to begin with, and then a dozen of other minor changes that will affect some minor institutions like the Consiglio of Economy and Labor, the CNEL, and some procedures by which laws come into effect that are supposed to make the life of the government much easier and the action of the government a little smoother and quicker. This is the claim of those who are proposing the changes. Those who are adversing the changes say that most of these reforms are either ineffective or dangerous, and the ones that were supposed to cut costs are basically nil.
And if this doesn't go Matteo Renzi's way, we could possibly see an election in 2018. What would that mean for Italy?
Well, we could see an election even earlier than that. If the no should prevail over the yes, for, well, let's say a two-figure percentage, in that case, the existence of the government would be in danger immediately, and it would be a matter of weeks, probably, before the government would be forced to resign. In that case, we could really go to new elections even in spring 2017. If the government goes on, elections are scheduled by 2018 at the latest. So we're basically enter an electoral campaign period in any case.
As early as that, so a lot of uncertainty. Of course, Andrea, we will be watching, monitoring what is happening this weekend. As always for you, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. Andrea Vannucci joining us live from Rome. Let's move on to some of the day's other news, because attorneys for the US President-elect Donald Trump and his supporters are moving to block election recount efforts in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. The legal motions are designed to halt Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein's request for a ballot review. The Green Party says its campaign is focused on ensuring the integrity of the US voting system. But even if the recounts take place, they are highly unlikely to change the overall result of the election. So why are they taking place? Let's talk to our correspondent Jane O'Brien, who is watching all of these developments in Washington for us. Jane, my goodness, tell us, these are these are those three states that went to the Republicans. This potential recount, these potential blocks, what is happening? Bring us up to date.
Well, these are three states that the polls predicted Donald Trump wouldn't win, and he did. Not by very big margins, at least not in Michigan and Wisconsin. A little bit bigger in Pennsylvania. He won there by 70,000 votes. But Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who never had any chance of winning any of them, decided that she wanted a recount. She said to ensure the integrity of the election process. Now, what that has done is put all these three states into an absolute frenzy of activity, because they have to get these recounts done by December the 13th. It's a monumental task, and that is the basis for some of the objections to going ahead. It's going to cost millions of dollars, and you're going to have very, very tired election officials and counters going through this process all over again. And there is concern that they might make a mistake in the rush to get these recounts done before the deadline. So that's a lot of the basis of the objection to it. Wisconsin, that recount is already underway. That started on Thursday. Michigan, however, probably won't start until next week now, unless there is court action to block it. Pennsylvania, they haven't even decided whether or not they will do a recount, because the standard for agreeing to a request is slightly higher. You have to prove that there was in fact fraud or some kind of irregularity, and it's not clear yet whether Jill Stein's managed to do that. So Pennsylvania very much up in the air.
And then, Jane, briefly, we're not expecting much of a result change. This isn't going to turn around who won the presidency, is it?
No, Donald Trump is still the president-elect, and he will continue to be the president-elect after these recounts, if in fact they are completed.
OK, Jane, as always, thank you very much for clearing some of that up. Jane there in Washington. Now, the United Nations is warning that millions of people are facing severe food shortages in northern Nigeria, an area that's seen years of fighting between government forces and Islamist rebel group Boko Haram. The UN says that around 400,000 children are already suffering acute malnutrition, and without urgent help, many will starve to death. It's appealing for $1 billion of humanitarian aid. Our correspondent Martin Patience has been to Maiduguri, where a small number of international volunteers are struggling to cope with a growing crisis. Now, I have to warn you that his report does contain some disturbing images.
They've survived Boko Haram, the Islamist militant group that's devastated this region. But as Nigerian forces regain territory, the full scale of the suffering is being revealed. Starvation, millions are at risk. Those in this clinic are at least getting some help. Ali is too. He's suffering from severe malnutrition, weighing less than half of what he should. His mother, Zara, says sometimes they didn't eat for 3 days straight. And then there's 1-month-old Mohamedou. His body bloated from malnutrition. His mother, Aisha, has 6 other children to feed. It's unbelievably difficult to get food here, she says. I have to send my children out to beg. Those who have fled the fighting now live in sprawling camps. Nigeria's government says it can't cope with the growing crisis.
People are dying for the lack of food. We see over 400,000 children severely, acutely malnourished. I mean, that's huge numbers, 1.5 million people displaced, upwards of 7 million people not able to cope with their basic food needs.
Kawa and her 2-year-old son, Abdullahi, fled their village last month. He's been treated for the effects of starvation.
The Boko Haram men were in our village. There was no food, no drinking water. And even if we bought food, the militants would take it off us. Life is a little better here, but my main problem is feeding my children.
This is a conflict that's engulfed the region, bringing misery to millions. Some of the areas are still controlled by the militants. They can't be reached, and conditions there will almost certainly be worse than here.
After years of violence, this conflict is now turning into a wider crisis. And hunger could end up killing more people than Boko Haram. Martin Patience, BBC News, Maiduguri.
Well, let's bring you up to date with some of the day's other news stories. And the two candidates in Austria's presidential runoff have been holding their final campaign events ahead of their vote on Sunday. The race between Norbert Hofer of the far-right Freedom Party and the former Green politician Alexander Van der Bellen is said to be too close to call. The mayors of Paris, Madrid, Athens and Mexico City have announced plans to ban diesel-powered vehicles from their cities. The new laws aimed at improving air quality are set to come into force in 2025. They'll offer incentives for drivers to replace their cars or lorries with hydrogen or hybrid vehicles. A former player at the English footballing giant Chelsea has claimed that he was paid by the club to keep quiet about allegations that he was abused during his time there as a youth player. Gary Johnson said that he was given more than $60,000 after being assaulted hundreds of times during the 1970s by Chelsea's chief scout Eddie Heath, who is now dead. Chelsea says it has hired an independent law firm to investigate the claim. The Gambia's long-term leader, Yahya Jammeh, has been defeated in the country's presidential election. Officials say that opposition candidate Adama Barrow has won by around 50,000 votes, with a share of over 45% of the electorate. Mr. Jammeh had been in office for 22 years and had promised to rule for $1 billion more. He has yet to comment publicly on the result. Here's our correspondent in the Gambia, Umaru Fofana.
Wild celebrations all across this nation. People have come out on the streets celebrating the moment it was announced that President Jammeh had lost the elections. They are celebrating what they call a new Gambia. They are celebrating what they call freedom. They are celebrating what they call the end of dictatorship. They are all across this nation. All across, particularly young people, are celebrating the end of an era. This is a remarkable turn of events in this country. We are just a short while ago, you would never have expected that President Jammeh's reign would come to an end.
Well, the BBC has spoken to the Gambia's former Finance Minister, Bakaru Daba, who served under Yahya Jammeh. He told us how he thinks the people of the Gambia will react to the surprise result during the next few weeks.
What the people of the Gambia have foremost on their mind now really is the freedom from this long night of brutalization and mistreatment, and they need to heal the wounds. They will be very keen in that regard to put behind them as much as that is possible. But of course, there is the fact that after 22 years, there might be a few questions in the name of accountability, which may have to be asked.
Brazil and Bolivia have begun the process of repatriating victims of Monday's plane crash in Colombia that killed 71 people. It comes ahead of an open-air wake that will take place at the home of Brazil's Chapecoense football club, which lost most of its team in the crash. Well, Julia Cañero sent this update from outside the stadium.
This is one of the entrances of the Condá Arena, and it's where people have been coming to leave their messages and pay tribute to the victims of the plane crash in Colombia. There are lots of drawings, letters from school children, from friends, families, banners, saying that the players will be eternal champions. I see over there. There are tributes also to the journalists that were in the plane, more than 20 journalists that were heading to Colombia to cover the final of the Copa Sudamericana. Today, the bodies of the victims are being flown to their final destinations. Earlier on, the 5 Bolivian victims were taken on hearses to the airbase in Colombia to be flown back home, and the Brazilian victims are being brought back to Brazil, and more than 50 of them will be brought here to Chapecó. The president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, confirmed that the director general of Lamia, the airline that owned the aircraft, had been his presidential pilot, and he said that drastic measures would be taken to find out the causes, who was responsible for the crash. And images of the rescue operation at the site of the plane crash have emerged. They show the moment when Erwin Tamiri, one of the crew members, is being rescued. He is heard calling out to the other crew members and is then told to calm down, not to wear himself down. And here in the stadium, preparations are being made for a collective service that will be held on Saturday. Under these tents, around 50 coffins will be placed, and the stadium is expected to be filled to capacity with fans, family members, friends, and up to 100,000 people are expected here to pay tribute, to bid farewell to the victims of the plane crash.
The Mariam Masjid is not your usual mosque, but then again, Sherin Khan is not your usual imam. As part of the BBC's 100 Women season, meet the half-Finnish, half-Syrian who set up the first women-only mosque in Northern Europe.
My name is Sherin Khan, and recently I started the Mariam Mosque, which is the first mosque in Scandinavia with female imams. The Mariam Mosque seeks to reach out to a new young generation of Muslims in Europe who feel homeless. It's about challenging radical Islam, challenging the growing Islamophobia, and it's about promoting progressive Islamic values. And when you want to promote progressive Islamic values, female Muslim leadership is an important part of that. To me, it's not a matter of gender, it's a matter of knowledge. The one who has knowledge should be able to disseminate the Islamic message. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, women were acting as female imams in the house mosque of the Prophet Muhammad himself. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. It's very hard to hold on to a narrative of Muslim women being suppressed when people can see Muslim women taking the lead. We have female imams in China since the 1820s, in the US, in Canada, in Germany, in Belgium. Half of the population consists of women, so it's only a matter of time before women will take the lead and make themselves visible also within religious institutions.
Now imagine retiring at the age of 31 would be nice, wouldn't it? Well, the world of Grand Prix has had a shock because Formula One world champion Nico Rosberg has announced his immediate retirement. He only secured the title last Sunday, gaining enough points in Abu Dhabi to keep his Mercedes teammate Lewis Hamilton in second place overall. Well, this is what Hamilton said about Rosberg's decision. He's got a family to focus on and wants more children, and Formula One takes so much of your time. Will I miss the rivalry? Of course. Well, here is Nico Rosberg explaining his decision.
Ever since I started when I was 6 years old, I had, a very, very clear dream, and that was to become Formula One world champion. And it was very, very clear in my mind, as long as I can think when I was growing up. And now I've achieved that. I've put everything into it for 25 years of racing. I've achieved this childhood dream now, and I'm not willing to do that sort of commitment again for another year. and I'm not interested in coming fourth or whatever. You know, I'm a fighter, and I want to win. So yeah, not interested to do that again. Don't want to do it again. And so I've decided to follow my heart, and my heart has told me to stop there, call it a day.
Wow, Nico Rosberg announcing his retirement. Now, sometimes it feels like the Rolling Stones have been around forever, but now it seems they've gone back to their musical roots. The band have just finished recording a new album of cover songs reflecting their love of American blues performers. Well, my colleague Naga Minchetti met up with Sir Mick Jagger to ask about how he managed to keep on being inspired more than 5 decades after he began a life in rock and roll.
Sir Mick Jagger, thank
you
you
weren't
so
going to call
much.
me that.
Well,
I thought you said you weren't going to call me that.
I'm being respectful. I'm being respectful. I'll call
Or
you Mick in a minute.
facetious.
How very dare you. Now, the new album, Blue and
Yeah.
Lonesome. Tell us about it. What's
Yeah.
inspired you to bring this album out?
We were cutting new songs, and we finished one, and we said, oh, let's just do a blues a minute just for fun, just to relax, you know, because doing new songs is always a bit challenging because you don't quite know how they're going to go. You can do them a million ways. So let's just relax when we play this blues. And we said, oh, that sounds really good. Did you record that? And they said, yeah, we recorded it. And then the producer, Don Juan, said to me, he said, you better get a list of blues songs, so I think everyone's going to want to do more tomorrow. So I went and did my homework, and sat on my computer and looked at all my blues collection and made a list. We did 12 songs, and then we mixed it, and then I said, you know, so what are we going to do with that then?
How long did it take you?
3 days.
Do you think you got it right? When you listen back to it now?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, you know, I've never met anyone that thinks that they've got it really right. It was a good experience to play it for 3 days in the studio, and I'm sitting there like rather mesmerised by the whole thing with headphones.
Is there anyone now you look to and think, you've got it, you've got the longevity that we've had, the Stones have had, 50 plus years? I mean, it's quite unusual.
To want to be doing it for as long as we've done it for us, you've got to be a bit crazy. You might want to stop and do something else or move on to some other field of endeavour and stop, you know, being on stage.
You don't want to stop though, do you?
No, but I mean, not everyone wants to. I mean, if you said to Adele, you know, do you want to do this when you're my age? She'd probably say no. You know, if you asked her point blank, do you want to really do that? She'd probably say, I can't imagine doing that. I hope I won't be. I'm just making her lines up.
But would you have said that when you were her age?
Yeah, I would have said the same thing. Yeah, definitely. I would have said the same thing.
So why are you still doing it?
I don't know. I just still enjoy it, I guess.
It's been a pleasure
Very
talking
nice to talk to you.
Thank you
Lovely.
so
Very
much.
nice.
Thank you very much.
Whew, that's a cut.
So Mick Jagger there showing no signs of retiring whatsoever, speaking to my colleague Naga Minchetti. We have lots and lots more on our website. And don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I am at Kasia Madeira. There's Facebook, the website, lots more as always. But from the time being, as always, thank you very much for watching World News Today. Bye-bye.